It's the Dev Friday Show with Mark and Tim.
And another late start for us today, Mark. Just a little bit behind when we normally are.
We may be late, but we'll always be here, Tim.
We may be late, but we'll always be here. Is that how that? Okay.
It's only for the live show. If you're watching this back where you should be in the podcast, then
that's right.
It's on time.
It's always on time on the podcast because we correct for time. So that's part of our rigorous editing capabilities. The other thing, I got last week's show up. I did not have enough time to do the chapters though. So there are no chapters in last week's show.
Well, that's okay because actually I started working on doing the podcast 2.0 chapters this week.
Oh,
so
nice.
I'm getting back into now that the semester's winding down and getting back into
closer to having official chapter support.
Yes,
that's
I've been
great.
Working on a simple kind of custom JavaScript audio player for that can kind of be integrated with the chapter selection. So I started. So hopefully for next week I'll have that done. So I started on this week and I'm looking into it. So it's not that hard. Just just have to code it out. So the biggest issue is going to be is going back between all these markdown files and turning the chapters into an array.
Into whatever you need them to be. Yeah.
Basically, it has to be an array. So basically, I have to do like a list in an array to.
So just reformatting all those. Well, if only
that's
we knew programmers that could like take stuff and run it through some code and come up with that. But speaking of chapters, Mark,
I was thinking, I wish I knew a PHP developer who could do that.
Yeah, if only you did. Speaking of chapters, I can't help but notice a new background behind you. And is that an indication that you are starting a new chapter in life? Is this the new gig that I've been hearing about?
It's not a new gig. No, it's not a new gig yet. But I am trying a different setup here. I have brought my expandable green screen back out again.
It's back. The green screen's back.
I haven't put the lights up yet because I'm trying to can I do it just with some color filters and some simple lighting that's in front of me? It's doing okay because the light, having those big softbox lights around you in my office was always that was kind of a pain. I'm not bringing those back out because that was just too much work. And
it's not bad. I mean, there's a little green on the side there.
Yeah.
Just a little spill. But it's not bad. It's not bad.
Because I know, because if I had better light on the green screen itself, it's much more, there's better contrast between me. So I don't know, working it out.
For me, the issue is the room that I do it in, I have so much natural light in here. It changes throughout the day. So if I balance it like the night before a talk and I'm doing it with the green screen, well, in the day it's different and it's just, the thing is, it's usually good enough to show the content behind me and look reasonable enough that nobody's going, that's weird. What's with all the green around it?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about. So I want to kind of have the option to do better overlays, but at the same time too, I want to, some people may not like my action figure background. So
were there complaints again?
No complaints. But I'm just thinking about, because, when you go to talk to people on Zoom, especially if it's like a kind of those first impression type scenarios.
Those first impression scenarios. I can't imagine what context those first impression scenarios
from my school. When I meet with my students, they love it. That's great.
Right.
And when I meet with other faculty, they laugh at it. They kind of think it's funny. But then at the same time, though, if I start meeting with other people, other professionals, who knows what they're going to think? So I don't know.
I see what it is. So you're trying to, I'll tell you this. I have seen a bunch of different, what do I want to say? Yes, a bunch of different backgrounds. And there haven't been a whole lot of effort maybe to make it look nice and clean. It's just like, this is my, it's either the office, which is good, or sometimes it's not. Maybe sometimes it's more like mine, which is like a crazy office right behind me. Right. But,
well, the one thing that
I would say I've never thought less of a developer that I was interviewing because of like the fact that their background was either just a Zoom replacement background with the with the weird. It's not even green screen. It's like the detection of you. That's never factored into how I considered them, but that may be different.
Well, one thing I was considering because I was watching my video back and kind of seeing the back, because when I have my display behind me with my my figure display it's all lit up in glass cases. It's very, very bright. It's very obnoxious. And I feel that there's not enough contrast between me and the background, which I even think for yours, even though it's a simple room, you have some perspective and some contrast there. So I think with anybody, if you could add enough contrast between yourself and the background. That's really all you need. So that's what I was trying to kind of figure out, which I was trying some different lighting setups. Like if I turn off the lights and have like maybe like a softer light on the background, would that be enough for it? I don't know. But dilemmas when we're in this online virtual Zoom world and trying to, get the right setup. So.
But specifically dilemmas as you try to meet with other professionals that you may not interact with all the time. Can't imagine. Well, last week we ended and you asked the question about, I forget what it was, like framework versus not frame. Like it was a decently philosophical, since I didn't do the chapters, I didn't listen to the whole show again. Not that I listened to the whole show again. I read the transcript of the whole show again. Not that I read the whole transcript, but I look for funny things that we said that I can turn into chapters. And because I didn't do that part, it took me a while to remember like what it was that we had ended on last week, and that was that philosophical question of what is. It's almost like, should you use a framework, or I forget how you phrased it, but it was like, what defines a framework versus like say a component library or something like that. But
so I always go through the cycle each year, which I have a love affair. I have a love and hate affair with frameworks.
Well, like unless you're a front-end developer, so there's always a new one.
True, and that's part of it too. And I hate the constant like treadwheel that you're on for maintainability, but also trying to keep up with the current and what everybody's doing with front-end development. That is kind of one of the things that you have to deal with, or just ignore it altogether and just kind of keep your head down and just use what you're going to use and just stay with that.
For a second, because it's just going to roll over me, and I got it now. You just coined the phrase treadwheel, which is apparently it's like a treadmill, but like
treadwheel.
What are those?
No, you know what I had in my mind? The picture. I was like a gerbil, one of those
gerbil,
like
on the wheels.
The wheel, right? It's a treadwheel,
so
right?
No, is that Is that actually a treadwheel?
No, it's probably not.
This right here is
maybe if it has treads. If it has treads on it, it probably is.
What do you call though the thing that a gerbil spins around on? Is it called a treadwheel?
No, I never had one, so I don't know.
I need to know this now. All right, you go talk about whatever you were going to talk about as I hit my microphone and look up what a treadwheel is.
No, because like I said, I go through this issue probably about once or twice a year, where I just start to think about, okay, what is the framework? What are the libraries I'm using? Especially when I start new projects or look to extend projects and trying to add to them and start to think about what tools I'm using for that. And like I said, I love frameworks. Like I've learned so much from a development perspective. Like we talked about in the past about like MVC. Like I learned MVC through using ASP.NET. Like that was my first kind of interaction with it, and using the .NET framework. And then so like learning the .NET framework while also learning MVC through that to kind of, provide a good structure to the project. That was great too. And also with my experience with, Ruby on Rails, to Django, all these big frameworks that basically have good structure to them, but also like we talked about, or you said, a framework is a framework if you have to basically build your project the way the framework prescribes. Like if you really want to do that. I remember using the Zen framework in the past, like we talked about, you have good experience with that.
Now,
and like you used
Laminas.
It's interesting where like once again, like when I get into a framework, I basically just adopt it, where I say, okay, if I'm going to use it for a project, I'm just going to just go full on to it. I'm just going to basically structure the project the way it wants me to do it, and then kind of just do it the best way. Because I feel like, isn't that the best practice? I don't know. But interesting, your perspective, when you use the Zen framework in the past, you used it more from a library perspective, because they try to walk that line of saying, okay, it's a framework, but also it's a library or component library in a sense, where you could just use it without it being a framework.
And I've done it both ways. There's been times when I used it very much from the opinionated, hey, I'm going to build an application using the Zen framework modules and the way that they lay it out. And anymore now that it's Laminas and the project that I do my most work on right now, that we are definitely using it as a component library. Like we need something to validate, or we need something to represent our HTTP request. So we're going to use the Laminas library to do that. But yeah, because you can use that for either.
And then I've gone, once I go down this path of adopting a framework and spending my life with it for about 6 months to a year, and then once big updates come around, or maybe the next huge point, or 1 point, or goes from
right, they do backwards compatibility breaks, yeah.
And then, which I've had major issues with in the past with Ruby on Rails. That's pretty much I swore off Ruby on Rails after I had a huge, like once I can't remember what it is, going from like 2 to 3 or whatever, some version that was had. It's not just the framework, it's the libraries that are dependent upon that framework too. That's where I've had the major issues. So if you start off with like the base framework, usually if you just reuse just those libraries and just the code for just the base framework, usually upgrading is not that huge of a deal. I'm not fine. But then if you use other like third-party libraries that also depend on the framework, then if they haven't upgraded their code, it could provide kind of big incompatibilities, and you're gonna have to fork their projects and correct them yourself so you can get it running in your project, which I had done before. I had to do that with a React Native project where there was some, I think it was on Android or iOS, actually I can't remember. It was one of the native libraries. When I upgraded up to the next version of React Native, it didn't support something. It would just crash my project I was working on. So basically, I had to fork the project and then just find the issue, and just, it was a couple lines of code. But then I basically had to go through that process, do that, which I know hearing from other developers, they have to go through the same thing, and it is an issue.
Yeah.
So thinking about what frameworks do to you, they provide this huge layer of dependencies that you have to support. So when you sign up for a framework to use in a project, you're basically marrying that framework in a sense where you're dependent upon it. Everything you're doing is, and also what the way that framework is built has its own level of dependencies, which we talked about with Node and NPM, and with, it's just, that is just the nature of the beast, where it just, there's so many dependencies that if it works, it's beautiful. But if it doesn't, it feels very fragile.
Yep. Yeah.
And I don't know. I just always, like I said, once or twice a year, I kind of go through this process of, like, especially when I'm moving in between projects and just trying to reassess what I should be working on and what I should be working with. It has a huge issue. This also came up too when I was starting to do some work with we talked about using Grape.js and integrating Grape.js into kind of one of my initial
into a React app, right?
Well, because I'm starting to build out the site build, at least the kind of the first version of it, so I could at least have it, basically the front end component of that. And I was kind of thinking I could do this with React, but I've had some weird experiences if you adopt, kind of merge in kind of multiple JavaScript libraries that really are unrelated to each other. And then how do you know when they're going to start conflicting? Like, usually, even though I have seen other developers put a React wrapper or or some whatever type of framework wrapper around Grape.js, but Grape.js is basically its own thing. It's its own libraries, its own framework. It's not that big, it's not that large, so it's not. And also, I'm looking at the dependencies, and actually, it's not that bad. So I kind of like it. But then, do I really want to put it into another framework? So then I started looking at web components, which I never really had any experience with in the past, or really kind of ventured into that, but kind of seeing how web components is a way for you to write, using the component model, which I really, really like with HTML and JavaScript, which that's, with React, that's one of the big things I love about React is the way it kind of helps you structure your components and helps you code with, and just puts you in a good kind of pattern with that. So we could take that knowledge into web components and just basically, composing your objects with HTML, JavaScript, and also integrating your CSS. And it's basically you're writing to the APIs of the browser using web components, because it is a standard, which is a nice thing about it as a standard that's built into, or a spec that's built into the browsers, where it really, going forward or going into the future from compatibility standpoint, it actually should be relatively smooth in a sense where, with I know some older browsers like definitely older versions of Edge, or they might not fully support it, but they have like the polyfill libraries that can try to bridge that gap. But for going forward with like newer browsers, I think web components is kind of a very interesting model, because then I could take libraries like other JavaScript libraries like Grape.js and kind of just kind of piece them together, but not have to worry about them fighting together, or conflicting with each other.
So it's the idea that then through whatever interface or API that the web components expose, you wrap Grape.js into a web component, and React knows completely how to use web components, because it's
true.
Like
I can do that too. Yeah.
Transition layer. So if your overall app is React, and you're like, oh, for this section, it's not going to be React. It's going to be Grape.js. I can just throw it in there. It'll work just fine. And if I need to communicate with it or pull data out of it, it's easy, because they all use the same kind of API to get in and to get input and output out of a component.
Which that's definitely an option to go, because when you work with web components and React, they play really super nicely, I guess, because web components is basically just vanilla JS. Just vanilla JS and JavaScript. Right. And, using the new kind of ECMAScript, class style syntax, which I like. But it's basically just vanilla JavaScript, so that they definitely do play nice together. So that's a nice thing to do. But I was even thinking about for this editor component that I want to build into site build.io would based around Grape.js, but then
Was that sitebuild.io?
that's right, sitebuild.io.
Sitebuild.io. Okay.
It's catchy,
No, I just
right?
want to make sure that if anybody was listening to this later, they would know that they need to go to sitebuild.io to see what Mark is
And in the
building.
future, if people are listening this back like a year from now, oh my gosh, it could be a fabulous experience for them if they go there, and it'd be a very cheap, low cost, good developer tool to eventually build or design and build your websites with. So
that's the thing too. Like, I need to chapterize this, so in a year we can look back and we can listen to this clip right here, and I can say a year from now, let's see if it's.
Which we could talk about that too, because that once again, as I've been kind of working through this and kind of actually doing some practical coding on this and playing with the web components with Grape.js and starting to think about. Actually, I'm kind of more in line of where I want to take this and where I want to go, because it's kind of trying to solve my own problem with it. But getting back to the web, the way I'm building out with web components and with React, I'm even thinking of doing this without even React. Now, React is great because not only being a good, giving you a good component model to work with, with state management, that's, or having like a reactive declarative UI. That's what it's built for. So with web components, there is a framework, there's a library or small framework called Lit, LIT, which I was taking a look at too, which basically is designed for React developers who want to move to web components, and basically gives like a wrapper around web components. So basically, with the web components, you have this HTML element class you extend to make a web component. And it's a super clean, super simple way to make a component. And what Lit does, it basically extends that HTML element class and then gives you some additional properties and methods that just make it a little bit easier for giving you that reactive style UI and be able to do that like you'd be used to doing in React with Lit. So that's another thing I'm kind of taking.
So it's not about making React work with web components. It's about making web components feel like React. Is that right?
True. That's what Lit does, which that's pretty interesting. So I'm taking a look at it, and I like the fact it's very small, it's very lightweight, because that's the thing too. I don't want to just jump from React and go to another framework. That's why I'm trying to figure out the way of, want to go more of the library kind of model where, not be dependent upon huge, even though React describes itself as basically just a component library, a set of libraries that you could use together. But if you really want to do a good React app, you really kind of have to use it as a framework in a sense, so, which I still love. Like, I love React, I love Gatsby. I'm not going to go away from them, but I'm thinking about for like this specific project where I am going to be dependent upon other non-React style libraries, what's kind of a good model.
Don't have to go through the pain of making sure that they can be injected into the React app, but instead say I want them to play well with each other, as opposed to have one direct the other. So instead of, and that just means you're composing things at a higher level.
Yeah,
and which is from a web perspective.
What do you mean by a higher level? What do you mean for?
Well, because if you're going to say I have a React app, and then from a how my application works, it's basically the web page is my bootloader. And I'm explaining this in more server side terms, but it's it's at least my understanding, and probably front end devs are like, go back to your computer server, man, and let us deal with the front end. But anyway, your web page with vanilla.js, right? Like not the vanilla.js, which I think is a library, probably has to be, because it's vanilla and JS. It's got to be.
It's great. If you actually Google vanilla.js, they have this great like web page that looks like a framework, but it's made for, and there's joke about it. Like it's actually made for enterprise managers to look at. So if a developer in a big company says like, I just want to use vanilla.js, the development manager can be like, oh, what's a framework? Is it like a new framework? And so they Google it, they come to this vanilla.js website. It looks like a framework web page, but it basically just shows you how you can write JavaScript in a vanilla way without a framework.
Vanilla.js.
Yeah.
Ready to try vanilla.js? Oh, did you know it has closures in a math library? This is great. Anyway, so in my mind, your web page with whatever standard JavaScript you put on it is like your bootloader. It gets everything set and says, all right, now we're going to launch the React app. And that is pretty much what owns the control of this experience. The React app does. People interact with it. That's how it works. And then you say, oh, I need to use, I like Grape.js. I want to use that as my editor. So now I've got React components, and pretty much everything is a React component, because that's how it works, because React is my app. Now I have to figure out how to take this other library and inject it into React and make sure React can communicate with it correctly,
Yeah.
So it can pull the data out of it and then do whatever it needs to do, because it's gonna save it someplace. There needs to be a translation layer, but basically I'm composing my app at a high level. It's a React app, and I put things into it. But what you're describing with web components is at a high level, it's a web app where I may have some components that are React, and I may have some components that are Grape.js. And those components can communicate together because there's this agreed upon interface, this web component interface. So I'm just composing it differently. And instead of saying, I have to have one of these frameworks be the thing that's the application, I can say, no, I can have a web application that, hey, it's just a web application, because web pages have existed forever. And that's kind of what we're building. And now I'm just going to use what is exposed through web components to say, now the React is going to own these components, and my React app is going to control all this. But that's okay. React doesn't actually have to know that Grape.js is Grape.js. It just needs to know it's another component. And I know how to talk to components. So you're just composing it kind of like a higher level.
Yes. Okay. You mean looking at the bigger picture, the macro perspective over the whole
composition is that I have to have something that owns everything.
Yeah.
That something now is no longer a React app as much as it is my web app.
That's correct. Yeah, because
which then has all these components.
I want to get away from because one thing I was worried about was basically using React as a large wrapper around Grape.js. Which, like I said, they have a couple of developers who've done that. They made React libraries.
Yeah, you can totally
integrate
do it.
React, but then that creates another. Like I said, it's like you're adding this huge library inside of another one, and I'm just like, I don't know. I kind of felt like I don't know what would happen. Maybe that's my thing of the unknowingness of like, will I run into issues? Is there going to be conflicts? We'll have to deal with those. I'm like, because it just feels like I'm just accepting a lot without knowing much. And it was like, and
that's the same way that like. I really like looking at problems, right? Because I'm from a server side, and like you said, I've in the past used Zen Framework as the kind of overall framework, and I followed their conventions and I bootstrapped the application their way. But I think a better approach is let me bootstrap the application my way. Let me have just a simple thing that bootstraps it. Guess what? There are plenty of standards in the PHP world. There are plenty of these standards that says, oh, we're just going to agree that this is what a request looks like. This is what a queue looks like. This is what a message, an event, dispatcher looks like. And I can say, oh, that's great. I'm going to use the Laminas concrete implementation of the requests, but I'm going to write my own handler. So now I don't have to say, oh, I want to use this thing over here. How do I make that? How do I get that to fit in the way Laminas does its routing? Or nope, I just picked the router I wanted. I didn't have to worry about how to make it work with Laminas because I'm orchestrating it. I'm at a higher level saying, in truth, my application is just a PHP application that happens to say, I'm going to use the Laminas libraries for the request. When it talks about how do I route my requests, I'm going to go over here and use this other fast route library. And I'm going to modify it a little bit so it fits my purposes better. And when it comes to queuing things, I'm going to go use this one over here because I am owning the glue. I'm not adopting, oh, I have to do it this way. This is how the application has to be executed. Nope. I can execute it however I want because I control that. I just pull the components from everywhere. And that seems to be what you're able to do here with web components.
It feels a little bit better because, like I said, the more dependencies or relationships you make between different libraries, or it just like I said, from my experience, and you probably experienced the same thing, or every developer is that they've been doing a lot of work for like over 10 years. They probably definitely run into a project where like once you start adopting a lot that you don't fully understand, and you start becoming dependent upon libraries that you just hope that they're going to work, or hopefully they'll be supported. It just could possibly create issues. So that's something I'm just trying to I'm like I said, I'm not against. Like I said, I love React. I love the way and I also think about CSS frameworks too. Like I've loved in the past, like using like Bootstrap, like Twitter Bootstrap. That I kind of spent many projects on that. But then once again, once you write a site with that big CSS framework, then you become dependent upon that framework in a sense where like either you're going to maintain it, you're going to kind of dig in and to extend it and to support it yourself. Or if you want to kind of keep up to date with their updates, they could possibly break your site. So I don't know, just trying to simplify I don't know, my process and also what I kind of have to keep in my head at one time, which, as a developer too, have you experienced this too, where like just having too many choices, too many options, too many choices? Or maybe this is just a front end developer thing. I don't know.
I think it might be more of a front end developer thing. Now in life, yeah, totally. Like there's so many things I want to do, I want to play with, I want to build. And there's just so many directions that I want to go and I can't, right? Like, so there's that. There's the reason why there's a diode laser sitting behind me that I haven't assembled yet, right? And the only reason I got that is because it was the first step behind me before me either getting a CO2 laser for the garage, or more than likely, what I hope to do is building a CO2 laser myself. So why do I want to do that? I can't tell you why, because I want to cut things with lasers and do
Who
fun
doesn't
stuff.
want to cut things?
Yeah, and then hopefully I can cut enough things that maybe I can somehow convince myself that I should be able to buy a 5 foot by 5 foot CNC machine, because that's cutting things in it. Like, so yes, in that way, yeah. There's like
just
all
you just
these
want to do
things.
bigger cutting. You just want
right.
to amplify
more,
keep cutting
bigger. Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah,
bigger and bigger.
Yeah. But no, so then that way, yes, there's just so many different inputs. It's like, oh, I could do that. I could play with that. I could learn this. But no, from I don't necessarily see that from a code standpoint. I mean, there's always new things to learn and new technology to play with. I feel, though, that the front end is maybe evolving in such a way that it lends itself more to that. It does seem like it's slowed down a little bit, because the whole stereotypical, oh, there's another framework this week, I feel like that slowed down a little bit.
It maybe has.
And I think a lot of that is because of how things like these open not open API, that's the wrong, but like the concepts of things that are natively supported now in browsers, and they're agreed upon as an open standard. And it's like, okay, so most modern browsers have this web component concept. Cool. Now it's something that probably was frameworks were trying to do things like it internal to themselves, and now we're saying, oh, external. Now the platform that we run on the browser is going to accept
that's what I hope that kind of like what web components do is that it gets supported more, and because it is dependent upon the support from the browser makers, right? Because they're the one, they agree on the spec, and they're the ones that implement the spec. So how well that works and how well that it gets extended or gets improved upon, that's going to be up to them. But it is kind of interesting thinking about the features that you can do with web components, and it basically is. I feel it is kind of thinking of like we talked about more of a taking a look at the macro stuff. But if you actually are making web components, you're actually it's more of lower level to the actual browser. Where like you have to write more JavaScript code because you're actually integrating more directly with the APIs of the browser with JavaScript directly. So it'd be kind of interesting. The more support they put around that, the more options or more libraries they kind of built in, or the API that you could access in sort of this web component model. That would actually be kind of interesting to kind of see a lot of these features that we rely on frameworks now to give us to kind of make our lives easier as developers, or to allow us to code applications faster, build that right in the browser, build that API out. And that would actually be very, very interesting.
Yeah, and it feels too like then you're gonna have different type of frameworks, or maybe even not frameworks, but like smaller packages that say, oh, I'm gonna make the browser's component library. I'm gonna unify some things there, add some help to there, and you'll have a lighter weight library that you'll use when you're building this overall application that then you use components for. That can be their own standard, a React component or like you say, a Grape.js component, all that kind of stuff. Don't worry, we'll take the cough out in post.
Yeah.
That's what
well, I'm not as fast on the mute button as you are.
Well, I have a physical mute button here that I push. That's the key there. Now, one thing I saw, I think last week, maybe it was the week before, and I thought Mark's got to know this, because I'm but a poor back end.
Elon will buy Twitter, Tim. I predict it.
It doesn't matter. He's gonna win either way. He's gonna make
Twitter's
money.
going down somehow.
He's well, I don't mean it that way. I mean, like he's either gonna
the price is gonna go down. I do expect that.
You expect the price to go down? Well, it's probably not gonna go up.
The stock price. Oh, I thought about this. I was gonna tweet this, but I didn't know how to tweet this. Maybe you could have helped me how to phrase this. I didn't know how to really phrase it in like a non-political way. Like because
I'm definitely the person to ask about that.
No, well, okay. When I say political, I mean like political from a tech standpoint.
Okay.
Because people have different perspectives. Because people like really get like, I don't really care. Like Elon whatever. It's like I think he's kind of a crazy guy. He's that loves his moonshots, which I love too, and I love what he's doing with SpaceX and
I'm so glad that we all have our personal robots that.
But
we
anyway,
get in a year.
Well, true. Yeah, but then other people really, really do not like him. Like really hate him. Like they get put off by it, they get triggered by them, and I'm like, I don't know. I really don't care. It's like I just think it's kind of funny and fun to watch. But I was thinking about but one thing he said, and I do think he probably had some insider information because once he was talking to the board of directors and talking with Twitter about possibly becoming a bigger shareholder. I don't know if he said he was going to outright buy them at that point, but he probably got some insider information about how much real active users does Twitter have, and also from a percentage standpoint, how many of their users are bots. And I was wondering, I was going to tweet this, what if it actually became public? Like, what if there was an insider source or somebody who actually said that yes, or it was proven that 50% of Twitter's users are bots? Would Twitter lose 50% of its share value? So if it's trading at $45 or $50 right now, would it go down to less than $20, which is what it was a few years ago? So would it actually go back if it lose? Because is its value built upon the users or what they say about their active users and the users they can market towards because they make their money out of based on ads. So if they really do not have a lot of users to market those ads, and the value of the ads go down.
I don't know. I doubt it. I doubt if everybody, because I don't know who doesn't know that.
I was wondering too. One of the strategies that Musk may use, because now they're pushing back on him, is that he's just going to let this play out and drag it out, and also keep talking trash about Twitter and about its user base, and trying to bring the share price down so he could, he offered to buy it at $55 or $60 or something, amount over that. If the share price goes down to 30 by itself, that's.
But it's only gone up since all of this controversy.
Well, true, because everybody's talking about Twitter again. Because
I know. So that means if they reject his bid and then he sells the 12% of stock that he bought,
that's going to tank then too. Yeah. So that's what I said. Yeah, Twitter's going to go down somehow. It's going to go down somehow.
Anyway, that was not what I was going to ask you.
I know, back because I was actually following Twitter. I was back when I was trading stocks, when I had my couple of years of doing some day trading. I was following Twitter. I was following Twitter they were like $12 a share, and I was like, and that was before Trump. And then when Trump, and I told I believe the media, once Trump got elected, then the whole world was going to crash and blow itself up. And so I thought the stock market was going to do the same thing. No, completely opposite.
Yeah,
stock market just went crazy, and for the whole 4 years because he kept it pumped up, and so.
That was glad we're not talking about politics.
That was a bad bet. So
glad we're not talking about politics. What was it like? Yeah, it was like 14
no, we're talking about it from a financial standpoint, which I don't mind doing.
$14 a share, $15 a share back in early 2017, something like that. Yeah. Well, I mean, it IPO'd when? I forget. At about $40, I thought, but I don't know. Anyway.
I totally distracted you there too. I don't even know what you're going to talk about.
This was not at all what I was going to talk about.
Because I did want to talk about Twitter last week, but we never got to.
We never got to Twitter. Yeah. But they're all bots. Like, how many? You really? Yeah. There's so many bots on Twitter. Give me you don't need inside information to realize that there are bots all over Twitter all the time.
Have you been watching your follower count of like does it go up? Does it go up or down? I find it trickles down every week, maybe one or two. And I don't tweet that much. Yeah, I'm not using that much. Maybe I'll tweet if I don't, maybe it'll be 1 week I'll get a little crazy. But most often I may tweet probably 2 or 3 times a week, if that.
Yeah, I've lost probably about I want to say 20 followers over the past year and a half, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I don't really gain many. I used to gain more when I wonder
if that's basically because the bots are tricking down a little bit. Either they're taking them offline or they're not, because I think I read a stat where just like half the users on Twitter could be bots, but also half your followers are probably bots too.
There's it depends on how well you curate your
followers. There's actually a website that can look at that too. I think there's something that can analyze your Twitter feed and then can tell you that.
I kind of remember that back in the day.
Just looking to see who follows you and then how active they are. That's one good tell to kind of see. So.
Or not just how active they are, but how real their traffic even looks like. Yeah. Are they just reading or tweeting things that other people are tweeting the same thing, so it just looks like it's a bot, like a botnet that's running it. But anyway,
or they're following 500 people and then nobody's following them.
Right, one of those. One of the that might be, you might be a bot. It's like a new stand-up routine. Yeah. You might be a bot if you're following 500 people, but only one person's following you. You might be a bot. Anyway. Enough of that. That was not what I was going to talk about. What I thought was interesting. Now, I haven't seen this or paid much attention to it because I am just a simple server-side developer. I don't play around on the client side like you do with all your fancy cutting-edge
You probably live in a much
JavaScript
better life than
stuff.
I am. So yeah.
But anyway, just the other day, I ran across something and I kind of clicked through to find out more, and I didn't even know this existed. So maybe there's going to be people out there that are like, how did you know this existed, Tim? But I thought, particularly for you, with your now foray into C++.
Yeah.
Have you
Loving
played
that.
much? Have you played much with WebAssembly?
I have not.
Because
No,
like
that's-
from what I'm looking at, it's pretty much an open standard that most browsers support, and it's a compiled-ish language for a
okay.
virtual machine.
Okay. Yeah.
And
This is
you
actually
can,
I
you
did
can compile C++ libraries into WebAssembly that then can be executed in the browser.
I did briefly take now by about 6 months ago when I was started my kind of my low level journey and getting back to C++, start thinking about doing that. I did think about okay, since I know how to code a website with JavaScript or server side language or whatever, why don't we code our websites in C or C++?
Well, there's probably reasons.
Why
There's
not,
probably
right?
reasons. There's probably reasons.
So then you Google that, you come up with something like WebAssembly, which that's basically what you're doing, right?
Well, something like that. I mean, it's any my understanding is it's a virtual machine, right? That takes, you can compile down to it. It's supported by the major browsers, and how I see it used is like you say, oh, there's this great library for doing this thing. Specifically, like you're talking about image recognition, right?
Yeah.
So there's a great image recognition or computer vision or whatever you want to call it library for C++. I'm going to maybe extend that to do the searches the way I want to. So I'm gonna build my own search code off of the C++ library, and now I'm gonna compile down my code to WebAssembly, so I can in JavaScript in the browser actually call the method and say, okay, I'm gonna give you an image, a binary representation of an image. And I'm going to expect you to do the computer vision stuff that you did, because I wrote that part in C.
Yeah, but it basically is you're still writing your object, or you're, like you said, you're extending a library that is written in C or C++. That's compiled down. But then once it's, not sure where the connection comes from. Once you compile it down, how do you use it as within the browser to access it through the browser API through JavaScript? That's actually that connection I know nothing about.
That's what I briefly looked at, and it's almost like you just call load and you give it the WebAssembly file, and then whatever that exports as methods.
So you can do that with JavaScript.
Yeah,
so
you
with
just
JavaScript,
call it, you just then call it with JavaScript, I think. And I don't know the other direction. Like that was the example I saw. Someone was saying, "Oh, we took this C++ library and we compiled it down. So now we have the same methods we can call," and it was a simplistic thing. I think it was like adding and subtracting, a simple math library, right? We compile it down, and now we can call those methods from the browser via JavaScript because we've exposed those functions.
I wonder what the security model looks like around this, because if you could just load in a compiled
I don't know.
application using that load command that's connecting to the WebAssembly, I wonder if it has like a good
Well,
kind
I
of
don't know.
security
Yeah, I don't know
wrapper
what
in front of
security's
that.
on the virtual machine or whatever they want to call it.
Oh, because once you do it, it's running in the virtual machine, not specifically for this
browser.
process.
Right, it's
within
running in the
browser,
browser's virtual machine. So I don't know what that virtual machine gives you access to either. Like, can you actually do things to the DOM? If you could, then yeah, you could go and you could write an entire application in WebAssembly. I'm guessing it does. I don't see why the virtual machine wouldn't give you access to the DOM.
So
That's
for
not the examples I saw, but
So yeah, for very low level things, for games, I could see this could be very applicable. So if you wanted to act,
well, I think for games, Unity and Unreal have examples where you're building and then running it in a browser.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not taking a look at that, but I did wonder back in the day about if I wanted to take C or C++, could I just code a website with that and just have a compiled application? Which, think about for mobile applications, that's what I started to look at. Even though I don't have a mobile project in mind right now, but I was just thinking about, okay, by learning C++, is there kind of a nice transition? Could I just also use this knowledge now to just write native applications for iOS and Android? There are ways, especially if if you're using, if you still use Xcode, you can still, write your your application, you can access the libraries. With Android, you have to, as long as you use kind of its Android wrapper API, you still have to use like sort of like a Java bridge to kind of access that. But with Dart is kind of interesting, which is the Google's kind of language, Dart, the Dart language, which is their JavaScript, like sort of like if you take like JavaScript and C in a way, kind of has like a nice, but what the really cool thing about it, it compiles down. So with React Native, which I find is a great developer experience, but then there is this performance issue that or issues you could run into with having using the JavaScript bridge, because you even though a React Native application compiles down and uses native components, it's still using that JavaScript bridge to communicate with the components and communicate with your JavaScript that you're in your code. But with Dart, it basically compiles down to the device. So that's kind of interesting. Oh, I'm sorry, Dart and Flutter. It's actually Flutter. Dart's a language, and Flutter is the framework that compiles down into native device, so you can actually access the native components on the device, and it compiles it down. So that's kind of an interesting approach where you're still working natively on the device, but then it is truly a compiled language where it's compiling down to bytes and then accesses the device elements or libraries that way. So.
But never played with.
I have not.
But maybe you will.
No.
Maybe you will.
I don't know about WebAssembly, but like I said, I am taking a close look at Flutter and Dart, because I'm thinking about possibly, because that from a performance standpoint and doing some applications, especially if they're very kind of graphics heavy, animation heavy style applications, it seems to be a better approach, because that was something I always kind of like shied away from using React with, because of just the way that those libraries built from an animation or transitional perspective. So I don't know, it's kind of interesting, but I do like, learning C and C++, and I feel like learning languages that allow you to compile down has a lot of benefits.
And we're out of content. I just thought I'd let that one hang there for a second and see how awkward it would get.
Maybe our podcast needs more awkward pauses. I do agree with that.
Really? Our podcast needs more awkward pauses?
I think so.
Not
because
the normal
I think
ones,
we try to talk over
ones.
each other too much, or at least I do over you.
Okay.
So I'm trying. Maybe we should both kind of place more awkward pauses in the podcast.
Is that feedback? Is that feedback you're getting from our listeners? They're like, you know what? You guys talk over too much. Let's just. I need a gap every once in a while just to catch up. Is that? You're hearing it. You're hearing it from the listeners. Is that what's going on? Yeah.
See, I don't even know if we could do it, because we would just start laughing at each other. That's the thing. I don't think we could do it.
No. All right. Well. Okay. So we talked about frameworks. We talked about WebAssembly. We talked about web components. All the stuff that I have no idea about, because like I said, I am just a simple all right, so server-side.
This is my current.
developer.
I wanted to kind of get your feedback. So I like kind of bouncing my ideas off of you for site build and kind of what I'm doing with it.
Well, this is actually this is what I'm paid for.
Yes, true. This is what your consulting money is made through this podcast.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
Right, we talked about doing the MVC and kind of thinking about it, and how I like the idea of the no code approach with the Grape.js, and you even talked about you take a look at it too. Thinking if you had this working within a system, you could use to generate a template. You possibly would use it, because you kind of for doing your own personal websites, and that might be something that you may want to do. And so I was thinking that one of the frustrations I have when I deal with like React websites or Gatsby applications, is basically just a React website, but it's a static page builder, is basically I feel like each new project, even if I start with a template, I still feel like I'm reinventing the wheel, or in the sense where I'm still just doing a lot of work over and over again. So would it be cool if I could design, or especially when I'm trying to work out the design with the HTML, CSS, with the components and trying to build out the UI, I just feel like I just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And I was like, would it be nice if I had
the same structure? Like
it has the same structure, and I could copy and paste some of the components. But if I want to actually do with the layout, the UI, the HTML, the CSS, like there are some things I could go take from one project to the next, but I still have to rework it. It just feels like it's just a lot of extra work that I'm doing, which I would kind of like to be automated. Which would be nice if I could just have an editor where I could basically design the front end of the website, like I said, to basically allow me to create templates. And then within the templates, I can specify, okay, this template, this area of the template is going to be a nav bar component, or it's going to be my, I don't know, my sign up form component or whatever, whatever structure I want to have, be able to structure on the page with no code, basically just with the system, say, okay, this is going to be a component, and then it's going to output then the HTML, CSS in order to basically build the template or the structure for the project. So basically to basically do a little bit of a code generation for the actual component code that then I could then go and edit if I need to, then start to add the logic. So that's what I'm kind of thinking would be kind of nice, because what you could do that with Grape.js, you basically get the HTML, CSS out of it. But what if you put a sort of extend that a bit more, but not just do HTML, CSS, but also automate JavaScript in a sense, or generate JavaScript, where I can say, okay, for this part of the screen or this screen is going to be a set of components, and then the application then would generate the code for the components that then you could then open up into an editor and then edit to put your logic into where need be. So that's what I'm thinking about possibly taking, because I still like the static style build system style, frameworks, React, Gatsby, and the frameworks I like to use. I still want to keep that model, even if I use web components. I'm still using it with like Byte.js, which basically still gives me a way to kind of build the project. So even though I'm still using web components, I'm still basically building it out as a static site, which I still like. But then having the design phase of that automate that a little bit more, where I don't feel I had to like kind of rewrite the UI components over and over again, or basically just write a lot of boilerplate code to get the project up and going. Because then really think about a lot of the projects from a structure standpoint are very, very similar. And that's what templates are great for, because Gatsby and even React has some good template libraries that developers share what they've done, and you can do it. But then it still takes some time even if you adopt a template library, you have to kind of learn the way it's writing its components, but also the CSS. That's like makes some time to customize. So using this model of kind of basing around web components and using Grape.js, and then kind of using that as kind of a platform then to basically build a React style or Gatsby style project that then I could then take and then edit and then go from there. So what do you think about that?
I'm just trying to process it all, because so what I'm hearing is it feels like you're saying for a particular site, you have a standard set of, I want a nav bar, I want this, I want that. Maybe I do, maybe I don't.
Yeah.
But in this context, yes, I want a nav bar, I want a sidebar, I want a middle contact page, I want a footer. So I need to then do code gen to kind of create those that structure of those components someplace. And I'm guessing, is it also the fact that when you say it's a nav bar, it probably has some common code that would be generated with it to be like, okay, I'm kind of a plain nav bar that gives you the boilerplate, where then you'll go in and change, I need to tweak this, I need to tweak that. Is that
correct? Well,
fair?
still what Grape.js gives you a way to visually basically write CSS for you.
Right.
Because when you use its blocks, you define like a block on a page, it's structuring that with some default HTML. That when you define a Grape.js component, you're basically defining the HTML structure for it, and then it puts it onto the page, and then you with the editor modules or the functionality within the UI, you're basically defining the CSS for that HTML component.
Right.
So I basically would take that model then and say, okay, if that's a component that's already defined with HTML and CSS, because Grape.js is doing that for me, basically you're extending Grape.js or just extending its component model. We're saying, okay, if it's going to output that nav bar component, it's going to do it in a React component now, that with React code and with extending the React libraries and including those all to generate that component file in the React project. So basically what I want to have is basically a no-code way to design a React project, but would generate a React project.
Right. Okay. Right. So the boilerplate stuff we're trying to avoid, like kind of that tediousness, is just saying, for this project, I want these components in these places, and every time I do that, I'm doing basically the same thing. It's slightly different because I'm saying this component's here, this component's here, this component's over to the left, this component's over to the right, and it's not that I'm doing exactly the same thing I did with the last site, because I'm not. I put the component in the middle the last time. This time it's in the right. It's that I am doing the same process where all I am writing are a bunch of I don't know what I forget what we call them now. I would call them div tags, but I know we're using better than div tags now.
Semantic HTML tags, Tim.
Yeah, we're using the semantic HTML
section
tags.
tag, the article tag.
Yeah, section. So I'm defining them and
there is a
putting
nav
them in
tag,
different places. And the process isn't the fact that you're putting them in exactly the same place. The tediousness comes from the fact that you are just having to structure that DOM essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
In such a way that it's be easy for me just to drag and drop it. Why am I?
Yeah,
Is
you're right.
that basically it?
You're correctly right with the DOM, because basically you're writing the DOM objects. You have to do that over and over again, but along with writing the same CSS rules that are going to be
Right, because this is a sidebar.
Yeah.
So I'm calling it this, but what I really mean to the sidebar, and the tediousness there is, this time it's 150 pixels wide, or this time it's 33% instead of the last time when it was 25. But it's still, I'm just saying, write the thing that says align it to this side, and then the thing that is custom here is that it's 25 versus 33 or whatever that is. So you're saying Grape.js would allow you to create the structural elements visually,
yeah,
and make it really easy.
It's interesting. The more time I do, being a front end developer, and the more comfortable I get with HTML, CSS. Like I said, it's great languages, especially if you do it for a long time and you feel like you could go down, sit down, write an HTML, CSS page without even thinking. But you still have to do the work. So it's interesting. The more I know about it and the more easier it gets, the work still is annoying, because I feel like I hate repeating myself. I hate having to do the same thing over and over again. So that's what I'm trying to automate, because I still like the process of designing. And I like using CSS as a design tool for that, but I don't like the kind of the manual kind of process through it, because it just feels very, very tedious.
And the thing that disconnects from me is the fact that you're doing one in markup language, because that's all markup, the DOM.
Okay, well, yeah, the tags, yeah.
You're doing another in like a style language, which is CSS.
Yeah.
And like those type of repetitive tasks server side, you just start saying, well, can I have a generic thing that then I just slightly modify every time, and I don't create the same exact thing? Now some stuff code gen is the answer, because hey, I just want you to code gen this. Like a server side example would be, I have a bunch of constructor arguments. They're going to be the private properties of this class. Mm-hmm. Couldn't you just figure that out? Mm-hmm. And from a testing standpoint, this is where like code gen would be helpful for me. And I wish I had that concept. It's like, if I'm going to test something, well, look at the signature of that object. It expects these things, right? How about you just create a bunch of things using my favorite mocking library, and just, because that's what I'm going to do. That's the tediousness. Yeah. I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, in my test, I'm going to create a private variable called SUT for system under test. And then I'm going to make a new one. I'm going to pass it all the dependencies, but they're not dependencies. They're mocks of the dependencies. And I'm going to make them private variables too, so I can change how they work for each different test case.
I'm surprised there isn't like isn't there like a UI? Somebody's made that. It feels like there should be some way to kind of drag and drop blocks around to make kind of your flow, your testing workflow, and then be able to generate the code for that. That should be something.
Well, right? You don't even need drag and drop for that. You should just be able to inspect the code and generate it.
No, but you said the actual code is to write the test, in a sense, right?
Well, just to write those dependencies, because every time I'm going to say every dependency that you see is in the signature of this constructor, make a mock for that, set it to a private variable in my test class, and then create, in the setup phase, create the thing I'm testing and pass it all of those mocks.
Do you use like a CLI for that?
I don't have a good one yet. I've been looking for that. I know Storm helps with a lot of things in terms of, I'll just figure this out. Like my IDE helps with that. But that part of I've not found a good tool to quickly just say, I use Prophecy for all my mocks. So just take all the constructor dependency of this, make a bunch of Prophecy mocks, set them in the test as private variables, so whatever my test case is, it can say, I expected this to be called, or when this is called, do this. So I can manipulate the behavior of my mocks, and then create the thing I'm testing and pass it all the mocks, and then just, that's the setup. Now everything else is the stuff that I actually need to do. That's all the tests that I need to write. I need to say, when you call this method, or if it's in this case that this dependency provides this type of response, then my expectation is that when I call this method on the thing I'm testing, I get this back. Yeah, I got to write that code. That's not tedious, because that's me documenting how my class or whatever I'm testing is supposed to behave. But to me, the tedium comes from, I have to set up, it's just like, I can see this. It's the same thing I'm doing all the time. And I know there's probably some tooling out there where I could write the code to code gen that test I'm talking about. Maybe there's a PHP Storm plugin I don't know about that does that for me. If so, someone please tell me. I would love to know about it. But I feel like that's a little bit of what what you're saying, because it's like I just have to set up these things that are obvious. Like for every block, I'm going to need this and this and this, and that's going to be a React component, and I'm going to style it, and I'm going to use the style that I always use. So can I just pull that in? Some of the style stuff, it feels to me like, have you played with Tailwind? Now, again, not a client side. You know, some of the style stuff feels like that's something Tailwind's trying to solve.
Yeah, I know. I feel a lot of people talk about Tailwind, and I've looked at it, and I was like, but you're running a lot of you're basically using it feels like you're using HTML more than it should be with Tailwind, right? So you're using the CSS framework, and you're basically putting a ton of very declarative class names inside of your HTML, and it basically, which honestly, from an expressive standpoint, and if you're laying out the page, I totally understand why it's a good process. But then I feel like you're kind of, because HTML and CSS should be separate, right? That's why when I make my classes and my HTML, I try to be as very specific. I actually I tell my students all the time, I try to write as few IDs and classes with my selectors as I can, and just use the DOM structure. So understand how to just use the semantic HTML tags, throw in a few specifics classes where you need them to be, but try to avoid making classes when you can. And I feel like Tailwind's a complete opposite of that, where you're adopting a system of classes and you're just piling that into the HTML. And I'm like, something about that I just personally don't like. Even though I totally understand why it's attractive.
And say that my paragraph tag that matches has these attributes. I mean, doesn't Tailwind let you do it that way? In the style itself?
Oh, you mean like to declare like a rule for that specific tag and then define
I think you can just do it there and then be
I
as
just
declarative.
when I looked at the documentation, saw the examples of how you declare Tailwind classes in your HTML. It just looked ugly to me.
I'm sure the Tailwind fans that are listening to this, and there's many, I know.
But I understand how
they're screaming at their
it is an attractive process, because if you're somebody who doesn't like the look of CSS and want to deal with that and wants it to kind of fall within the Tailwind system, and you just want to be expressive with HTML, I totally get the approach. I totally understand that. But I'm like, I kind of like my HTML be as minimal as possible and be more specific in the CSS. Like I actually prefer the CSS to be, if I'm making a rule, I don't mind if that rule defines like 20 different selectors for that one rule. And those selectors look really, really complicated. Actually, I like that because I feel like the CSS is actually pretty efficient then.
I don't know. I think you should I think you should take a look at it, because I think I think the way it may present itself may not seem like something you like, but I feel like if I've dug a little bit into it, and I feel like it may solve a little bit what you're talking about, just not the way that they present it.
Maybe I am just kind of throwing away because the way my way it made the HTML look, I kind of was put off by it. Maybe I was kind of like, I don't know, because honestly, that was one of the reasons why I got away from Bootstrap too. Because of Bootstrap, and that's why I started using Balma. Which Balma, when I think about designing my own CSS framework here and there, and I started doing that with some UI components. I just use Balma class names because they're great. They're very declarative. They're simple. They're clean. And if I add them together within my class list within my HTML tag, it actually is not that many, and it kind of feels pretty efficient with doing it. With Twitter Bootstrap, they started what they were doing with the class names. It started to get to be very abstract. Like you had the class. I hate when I have to look at a class name, which is what Tailwind does too, and it forces you to look at their documentation. Like if I have to like know what ND-X-1 means, I have to go look at their documentation, right? That annoys me, right? But because I like to have simple, clean, declarative classes, because then I can just assume if I want more detail, I could take a look at the documentation. But I have to do a lot of, I kind of have to. It just feels a lot cleaner, and nicer. Like I like code that looks good. Tip, don't you like code that like has a nice feel and it feels like elegant and clean? And
well, no, I mean I'm not a Ruby developer, so no one's putting.
Oh yeah, you're a PHP developer. You don't care about that, right?
On the wall. Yeah. What in the world? Beautiful code, whatever. Does it make me money? Yeah, that's what I'm interested in. But no, this is. I think this is a great topic, because now I will be able to put on the Twitters that make sure you listen all the way to the end of episode, and I even forgot, like this, I don't know, it says episode 24, it's really episode 25, or maybe it's even episode 26. I can't even keep a track of the episode numbers.
There's so many now.
But I'll be able to say you should listen to that, because that's where Mark tells you how much he hates Tailwind. And let me tell you, that's going to attract some attention, I believe. So hopefully we'll get some listeners from this episode, and your ranting and raving against all of the things that Tailwind is trying to bring to the front
one
end.
thing I will say, at least this show is actually about code and about development. Last week's show, we were a little bit light on that until
I don't even remember what we talked about last week.
10 minutes, then we started talking about it. So at least, we did a little better
last
this
week.
week.
You were putting in floors or something. I don't even remember what we talked about.
We're getting back online. It took us a little bit of time.
Is that it? But this is definitely about code, and next week may or may not be, but make sure you tune in.
You never know. Because
Mark's going to tell you how much he hates Ruby on Rails, and let me think, what else could he be controversial about? And how good Elon Musk is.